Hi everyone. This is a quick review video which will cover the topic list that I posted on Canvas modules. If you haven't taken the reading quiz yet, it'll be available until tomorrow night, Friday night at midnight. You need to have it completed by then. All right, so let me know if you have any questions or difficulties accessing the quiz, which is you can access it from the modules or from Canvas assignments, not from assignments, rather from Canvas quizzes. Okay, so some general topics here to discuss. Capitalism in general, we talk about as an economic system, which firms, who are sometimes individuals, own the means of production. Production decisions and allocations are determined by markets. Private property is commonplace. And so I won't test directly on socialism and communism. We'll save that for the next module, but mostly how we distinguish in economics capitalism from other systems is ownership of the means of production. In capitalism, we have firms who own the means of production, and that differs from socialism, where we think of workers owning the means of production. Right, I showed a slide you can look at. One of the first couple slides in our module 1 PowerPoint was on the stages to progression. We mostly think of economies as being agrarian feudal, leading up to about the Dark Ages or maybe up to the Industrial Revolution, meaning there's a small group of landowners who can accumulate private property and wealth, and then a large group of serfs who live off the land. Some themes of classical literature. You'll have the PowerPoint, so I won't spend too much time here. If you're unsure about that, you can take a look. But some main themes: study of classes and behavior and needs as being determined by class. So we talked especially about the working class and about the landowning class, and on occasion the capitalist class, which kind of varies by author. And you have this focus on survival and sustainability. All right, so to our particular authors, we had a reading on kind of pre-modern economists of the ancient Eastern, Western world, Rome and Greece. And mainly you see in those writings, the justification for the state is to command military forces, defend territorial resources. And then we emerge from the Dark Ages about 1,000 years later with kind of the same ideas. We need to command military forces, protect the state, protect landowners' interests. But then we also have this additional focus on settling private property disputes. And so we've had some discussion about how does this understanding of private property come about. Justification for the existence of property from Locke: man should have the right to his own body and fruits of labor, should not have to fight for survival and face famine and disease and poor growing seasons, or countries' land, especially that wasn't being protected by natural barriers, was very commonly being overrun, crops surpluses being harvested, extracted by the landowning class. We see in our kind of post-Enlightenment era writings before, around the time of Adam Smith, the first appearance of a circular flow diagram in the Physiocrats. We also have there a focus on agriculture as a driver of growth, which we'll see throughout Adam Smith and through Malthus and Ricardo. We need more food to feed more workers and so on. Right, so circular flow that you would see in a 202 class kind of stems from here. We have Adam Smith and the labor time theory of value, which is kind of from Petty. You add up the total number of labor hours and capital hours, and then you compare them. We value all the capital and labor the same. The pin maker argument for the division of labor just maximizes production if you specialize. And then the theory of economic growth from Smith is that people specialize because of self-interested maximization. So they want to produce as much as possible, make more money, but it isn't sufficient just to produce more. We need people to be able to consume. And so we need some of that production to be agricultural, feed more workers, specialize, and continue to produce. So that's Adam Smith's theory of growth. It derives from specialization, but remember, it's not sufficient just to produce more. We need people to be able to buy stuff. So then we get into Thomas Malthus. Differential rent is a topic that comes up a couple places in the slideshow, and it just means in general the difference in production between productive land or one unit of land and sort of the next unit of land. In Malthus, it's the difference between production on one plot of land and the least productive plot of land, and then we'll see later in the Corn model it's slightly different, but rent as a differential between some understanding of more productive and less productive land. We have the population principle. People need at least a fixed quantity of food to survive. Passion between the sexes not waning. As a result, population grows geometrically while resources are fixed or arithmetic, and so we require these preventative checks like sex education or access to birth control in order to avoid population checks like disease and famine. Then finally, out of Malthus, we have this idea of gluts, which just means in general, when you have excess supply or unsold goods. And generally in the classical sense, what this means is that you have a situation when there's too much industrial production and not enough agriculture to feed people, or wages are below subsistence, so people can't afford necessities, much less purchase other things, and they go unsold. Okay, moving on then into Ricardo. We see this theory of comparative versus absolute advantage. Absolute advantage, who can produce more overall, from Smith. And then Ricardo sees that countries might have lower opportunity costs and can specialize in trade. Ricardo also adapts the theory of value. So whereas before capital and labor were valued equally, now we'll value all labor hours equally, but we're going to have different qualities of capital, and Ricardo believes that the different qualities of capital will explain different values or variation in product value. And then we have the Corn model. Once again, we see this theory of rent being the difference here now between the difference between average productivity and marginal productivity, but it's still the same differential idea, the quality or production on one plot of land versus the quality or production on a less productive plot of land. So owning the more productive plots of land is beneficial. That aggregates rent. Finally, we're going to get eventually in the Corn model and Malthus's model to this steady state quantity that we want to avoid because that's the end of economic growth. And Ricardo says, well, we can avoid that steady state, that maximum quantity that you can see on the slideshow, by international trade or by improving our capital. So loans, profits, innovation, international trade, all justified. We need all of that to expand average product, marginal product of labor. Right, so again, this is just a quick review. Hopefully you won't need this too much, but good refresher, and feel free to email me if you have any questions. Our last two authors that I'll be testing on are the philosophical radicals, Bentham and Mill. So philosophic radicalism in general refers to writings which focused on progressive reforms within the existing system as compared to the so-called socialist utopians who wanted a fresh new start without classes and so on. So here they wanted to stay within the capitalist system, but make some reforms. We can see the list of reforms on the PowerPoint. Bentham has the theory of utility, which of course people had been thinking about how valuable is stuff or what's the best choice to make and so on. But Bentham sort of mathematizes this idea into the sum of pleasures minus pains. And he writes on how you can calculate or add up all the pleasures and add up all the pains to take that difference. So finally, we have the utilitarian justification for loans and profits. Bentham thinks that we need some reliable banks because they'll reduce the harm associated with the lending industry. If we don't have banks who create loans, then people will still try to take out loans, but just from less reliable sources. Then we have a justification of profits, one, because they could result in utility, or because profits are required for innovation and trade, which has expanded commoner access to private property accumulation, wealth, and so on. Okay, so our last author then, I realize I'm just kind of going through this quick. We have John Stuart Mill, who provides us with the a priori approach to economics, meaning that we need to start with mathematical theory or assumptions and derive valid conclusions from that. And then we can test how close our conclusions are to real world data or observations. But we shouldn't start with statistical or anecdotal evidence and try to go from there. We have the harm principle, that the only purpose for which power can rightfully be exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others, harm categorized as physical or the psychological or financial harm, as described in On Liberty. I realize now I didn't assign On Liberty, but still understand this harm principle fairly straightforward. And the result of this, the takeaway is basically that actions which maximize individual utility are morally justifiable so long as they minimize harm compared to other possible choices or actions. So Mill believes, and Bentham, these utilitarians, the utilitarian ethic is essentially that everybody should be free to maximize their own utility, subject to the constraint that their choice should sort of minimize this idea of harm. Finally, we see the role of government, the greatest good principle, that government should enact policies which result in the greatest good for the greatest number of people, as measured by this utilitarian calculus. So you sum up all the pleasures or all the good done by the policy, subtract off all the pain. We should be trying to maximize that for the greatest number of people. Okay, so there's my quick review. Sorry, it's a little bit late. Let me know if you have any questions.